A lone crow sliced through the pink light of dawn, circling the old barn like a restless guardian. Its sharp caws echoed across the empty fields, waking the silence that had clung to the ranch for years. Locals said that bird had been there since the day old man Mercer died, and it hadn't left since. Down the dirt road, a dusty pickup truck rolled in, followed by a rumbling demolition rig. Behind the wheel sat Eli Mercer, the old man's grandson, a drifter with weathered boots and a face that had seen too many sunsets on roads that led nowhere. He'd returned for one thing, to tear down the last piece of his family's past and sell the land. The crew killed their engines. For a moment, the world held its breath. Eli stepped out, boots crunching on dry earth, and stared at the leaning structure. The barn's red paint had long faded to brown. The weather vane at its peak creaked slowly in the wind, until the crow suddenly swooped down and landed on it. It stared at Eli, unblinking. A strange chill ran up his spine. "Shoo!" one of the workers yelled, waving a wrench. But the crow didn't move. It just tilted its head, cawing again, louder this time, like it was warning them. Eli forced a chuckle, trying to shake the unease. "It's just a bird," he muttered. He signaled the crew to start. But as the first hammer struck the barn's siding, the crow erupted into a frenzy, diving low, wings slicing the air, circling faster and faster. Its cries became a sharp, relentless rhythm that filled the morning. And in that moment, Eli felt it deep in his gut. This wasn't just an old barn. Something beneath it didn't want to be forgotten. The crow was still there, perched on the weather vane like a sentinel, watching every movement below, as if it knew what was coming. Its black feathers glistened under the mid-morning sun, while Eli Mercer climbed out of his pickup, brushing the dust off. His jeans. He paused for a long moment at the gate. The ranch stretched out before him, dry, cracked earth, fences leaning like tired old men, and the barn standing crooked at the center, like it had been waiting all these years just for him. Eli hadn't been back here since the funeral. He told himself he wouldn't, but after years of drifting from one rodeo to another, after one too many busted ribs and broken promises, he was out of options. This land, his grandfather's land, was the last thing left with his name on it. And now, he planned to sell it, demolish the past, and move on. He pushed the gate open, and the rusty hinges screamed like they were protesting. His boots hit the dirt road, stirring up little storms with each step. It wasn't the walk of a man coming home. It was the march of someone returning to a memory he'd rather bury. As he passed the barn, his hand brushed against the weathered wood. For a second, the years melted away. He was 10 again, racing through those doors while his grandfather shouted after him. He remembered the smell of fresh hay, the warm breath of the horses, the way his granddad's hands were rough but steady when they lifted him onto a saddle for the first time. But those memories had a way of cutting deep. The barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was laughter, lessons, and the one place where he'd once believed he belonged. Then the crow let out a long, sharp caw, snapping him back. He clenched his jaw, as if embarrassed to have felt anything at all. Inside the farmhouse, the air was stale. Dust covered the furniture like a thick blanket. On the mantel sat a faded photograph. Eli as a boy on his first horse, his grandfather standing beside him with a proud hand on his shoulder. Eli turned it face down. He'd spent years trying to outrun that man's shadow. After the accident at the rodeo, the one that ended his career, he'd cut himself off from everyone. Family, friends, even this land. He'd sworn never to come back. But life has a way of dragging you to the places you swore you'd never return to. Later that evening, he stood on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky bled orange and red, painting the barn in a warm, nostalgic glow. It almost looked alive again. Almost. He took a long breath, then exhaled slowly. 1 week, he muttered to himself. Then it's gone. In his mind it was simple. Tear it down, sign the papers, drive away. But just beyond the fading light, the crow circled once more, like it knew something he didn't. And deep down, Eli felt it too. That barn wasn't finished with him yet. The next morning, the crow was louder than ever. It circled above the barn in tight loops, screeching like it sensed something was about to be disturbed. Eli tried to ignore it. He had a job to do. The demolition crew set up their equipment. The old barn creaked as if it understood what was coming. Dust floated in the still air, and the scent of dry wood and rust mixed like a memory long sealed. "Take it down," Eli said flatly. The first strike landed, a heavy sledgehammer slamming into the siding. A plank split, echoing through the empty fields. The crow went wild, swooping lower, its wings cutting through the sunlight like black blades. It cawed again and again, more desperate this time. Eli frowned. Something in that sound didn't feel random. He followed the bird's erratic flight path as it circled toward the barn's front entrance, hovering above the floorboards. Then he heard it. A faint, hollow thud beneath his boots. He knelt down, running his hand over the warped planks. One board was loose, edges splintered but recently shifted, like it had been disturbed from below. "Hold up!" he called to the crew. The machine stopped, leaving only the crow's cries echoing through the valley. Eli grabbed a crowbar and pried the board up. A burst of stale, cold air rose from the darkness beneath. It smelled of damp earth and old leather. He led a flashlight into the gap and froze. A staircase. Wooden steps leading down into the ground, hidden beneath the barn for who knows how long. His pulse quickened. He hadn't expected anything more than rotted beams and dust, but this was different. He climbed down slowly, each creak of the steps echoing like footsteps in a forgotten memory. At the bottom, the air was cool and still. His flashlight beam swept across stone walls and support beams, revealing an underground stable, perfectly preserved. Cobwebs hung like curtains. Rusted tack still clung to nails. And then he saw it. Tethered to an old post was the skeletal frame of a horse. A mustang, its bones arranged as if it had simply lain down one day and never risen again. Beside it sat a weathered trunk, iron clasps, rusted but intact. The Mercer family brand was burned into the lid. Eli's hands shook as he forced it open. Inside lay bundled land deeds, a hand-drawn map, and a faded black-and-white photograph. In the photo, his grandfather stood proudly with a group of unfamiliar men, hard-eyed ranchers holding ledgers and tools. And behind them, that same underground stable entrance, fresh and new. It was like uncovering a chapter of family history he never knew existed. But before he could process it, tires crunched on gravel outside. Eli climbed back up, shielding his eyes from the sunlight. 2 men in pressed shirts and city boots stepped out of a shiny black SUV. "Eli Mercer," one of them asked, flashing a practiced smile. "We're with Frontier Development. We heard the property might be for sale. Thought we'd stop by before things get finalized." Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. They looked around the ranch like predators sizing up a meal. Eli glanced back at the open floor, then at the men. Something about the timing didn't sit right. The crow landed on the barn roof, silent now, Jay just watching. Eli didn't know it yet, but he'd just uncovered more than an old stable. He'd stumbled into a fight for something far bigger than himself.
And the land wasn't going to give up its secrets without a battle. The crow returned that night, perching on Eli's windowsill like a black silhouette carved against the moonlight. It didn't make a sound. just stared inside with those glassy, unblinking eyes. Eli tried to shrug it off, but something about the silence felt heavier than before. He had told the developers he needed more time to think, but in a place like this, that kind of answer doesn't go unnoticed. The first sign came at dusk. Eli was locking up the barn when he noticed a long stretch of fence wire cleanly cut, the wooden post leaning outward like a breached wall. He followed the line out toward the pasture. The ground was disturbed, hoof prints and tire tracks overlapping in messy spirals. It wasn't the work of kids. Someone had been out there with purpose. He fixed what he could, but that uneasy feeling stuck to him like dust on his boots. Later that night he lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles. The crow was still on the windowsill, now quietly grooming its feathers. The wind picked up outside. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats, distant at first, like a single horse trotting in an empty arena, then clearer, echoing up from beneath the floorboards. From the underground stable. Eli shot upright, heart pounding. He grabbed his flashlight and headed out barefoot into the cold night. The barn door groaned as he opened it, the beam of light cutting through the black. The floorboards above the hidden staircase vibrated softly, but when he lifted the hatch and shone the light down, nothing, no movement, just that same still, stale air from before. He stood there for a long time, listening. The hoofbeats were gone, but the silence they left behind was worse. The next morning, the trouble escalated. His truck wouldn't start. The hood was up within minutes, and sure enough, the beast's battery cables had been cut clean. Tools from the shed were missing. Fence damage had spread overnight. Someone was testing him, pushing, inch by inch. By noon, he drove into town for supplies and answers. Inside the local diner, he found Clara Reeves, the county historian, a woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a mind full of buried stories. When Eli told her about the underground stable, she froze mid-sip of her coffee. "You found it," she whispered. "Found what?" he asked. She leaned closer. "That barn wasn't built over nothing. Back in the frontier days, smugglers used tunnels under these hills to move contraband, guns, horses, sometimes gold. Your grandfather's land sat on the main artery. It's why this place was valuable back then, and why it still is now." Eli frowned. "You're telling me there's tunnels under there?" "Not just tunnels," she said. "History. And people with deep pockets would do anything to get their hands on it." On his way back, the crow swooped overhead, following his truck almost like an escort. He'd started to notice its timing. It was always there before something happened, like it knew more about this land than he did. As the sun dipped behind the hills, he pulled into the ranch to find fresh tire tracks by the gate, ones that hadn't been there that morning. His stomach tightened. Night fell quick. The wind howled through the rafters and the barn groaned like an old ship at sea. Eli double-checked the locks, boarded the windows, and sat with his rifle leaned against the wall. Around midnight, the crow let out a single sharp caw. Then came the sounds again. Not hoofbeats this time. Whispers, faint, like voices drifting through the earth. Eli pressed his ear to the floorboards, every muscle in his body stiff. He could swear he heard someone moving through those tunnels. Outside, a fence post cracked. Tools clattered to the ground. Footsteps crunched in the gravel. Whoever they were getting bolder. Eli stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, scanning the shadows. The crow sat on the roof beam, its feathers bristling in the wind. Nothing moved. But this wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a siege. And Eli could feel the land itself stirring. Old tunnels, restless secrets, and that crow watching like a sentinel of some forgotten story. Somewhere in the darkness, someone wanted what lay beneath that barn, and Eli was starting to realize they weren't going to wait much longer. The crow screamed first. A sharp, piercing cry that sliced through the still night, yanking Eli from uneasy sleep. He jolted upright in bed, heart already hammering. He knew that sound now. It wasn't random, it was a warning. He grabbed the rifle leaning against the wall, the same one his grandfather had carried in his youth, and stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low, silvering the fields. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Then he saw them. Headlights off, engines killed, 3 black trucks rolling up the dirt road like shadows. The developers hadn't come to talk anymore. Eli's breath clouded in the cold air as adrenaline rushed through him. "All right," he muttered, cocking the rifle. "Come and get it." He sprinted toward the barn, boots pounding the ground. Inside, he doused the lanterns, plunging everything into darkness. The creak of old beams and distant caws of the crow echoed through the rafters. Then came the sound of boots crunching gravel outside. Doors slamming, men whispering, metal clinking. They were here. The first shot shattered the silence. A round punched through the barn wall, sending splinters flying. Eli dove behind a stack of hay bales and returned fire, the crack of the old rifle rolling across the open land. The men spread out. He caught glimpses of their silhouettes through the gaps in the boards, moving tactically, not like amateurs. They wanted this place badly enough to risk a firefight in the middle of nowhere. Rounds peppered the barn. Dust rained down from the rafters. Eli's heart pounded like a drum, but something had shifted inside him. He wasn't running anymore. He was defending something now. He moved through the barn's shadowed interior like he knew every inch, because he did. This was the ground he grew up on. The barn groaned with each bullet, but it held, just like it always had. Then came a loud thud at the door. They were trying to ram it. Eli sprinted to the underground hatch, pulling it open. Lantern in one hand, rifle in the other, he dropped down into the tunnels. The air below was damp and close, carrying the scent of earth and old wood. He moved quickly, knowing they'd follow. And they did. Boots slammed above, then descended after him. Lanterns flared in the darkness, casting wild shadows on the tunnel walls. Gunfire echoed in the confined space like thunder trapped underground. Eli ducked behind a stone support pillar, firing back. Sparks flew as bullets hit old beams. The tunnel became a maze of light, gunfire, and echoing footsteps. And then, somewhere deeper inside, he heard it. Hoofbeats. Not from the men, not from anything living, but from down the tunnel, faint at first, then rhythmic and sure, like a horse galloping across hard ground. Eli froze, lantern flickering. The sound rolled toward him like a ghost from the past. And somehow, he knew. His grandfather had shown him once, long ago, a hidden escape route through the tunnels, a secret only family knew. Eli turned toward the sound and ran. Behind him, the attackers shouted, their lights bouncing wildly. Shots cracked against the walls. The hoofbeats guided him around a bend, toward a support structure he remembered from his childhood stories. Wooden beams crisscrossed the ceiling like ribs. Above it, an old mining shaft led toward the creek bed. Eli glanced at the beams, then at us. The lantern flame dancing in his hand. A plan sparked. He ducked behind cover, waited for the men to bunch together in the narrow tunnel, then fired a single shot into the support beam. The sound was deafening. The tunnel groaned, a deep rumble rolling through the earth. Dust filled the air. Cracks spidered across the ceiling. "Run!" one of the men yelled, but it was too late. The beam snapped. The tunnel collapsed behind Eli in a roaring cascade of rock and timber, sealing them off. He stumbled backward as the lantern light flickered wildly, the air thick with dust. For a moment, the only sound was his own ragged breathing. Then, one final hoofbeat, echoing faintly down the now blocked tunnel like a thank you from something long gone. Above ground, sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights soon cut through the dark. The sheriff's truck skidded to a stop near the barn, officers piling out, guns drawn. Someone had tipped them off. Eli never found out who. The developer's men, coughing and covered in dirt, were dragged out through the mine's secondary exit downstream. Their plan had crumbled, literally. Eli emerged from the hatch, lantern still glowing. The barn stood behind him, riddled with bullet holes but upright. The crow circled overhead, cawing triumphantly. Under the starlit sky, Eli lowered the rifle. His hands were steady now. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a drifter. He felt like a man standing where he was meant to be. The sheriff approached him. "Heard you had yourself a little war out here," he said, half smiling. Eli just nodded. "Something like that." As the lights flashed against the old barn, the crow landed on the weather vane, silent this time, watching, guarding. Eli looked up at it, and a faint smile crossed his face. The land had been tested, and it had chosen its defender. The crow was the first to return. It perched high on the barn's weather vane at dawn, silhouetted against a sky streaked with gold and soft pink. Its head tilted, black feathers gleaming in the morning light. This time it was, and crying out in warning. It was simply watching, guarding. Down below, Eli Mercer stood in the cool air, a mug of coffee warming his hands. The sheriff's trucks were long gone now, tire tracks fading from the dirt road like the end of a storm. The men who came in the night were in custody, their plans buried along with the tunnel they'd tried to steal, but the land had survived, and so had he. The barn, scarred with bullet holes and splintered wood, now stood like a veteran after battle, bruised but unbroken. Days passed, then weeks. The county brought in officials, historians, and surveyors. Clara Reeves led the effort. She moved through the tunnels with a reverence that made Eli see them differently, not as a burden but as something alive with history. One morning, Clara spread out a set of old documents on Eli's kitchen table. Maps, letters, photographs. Her eyes gleamed behind her glasses. "Your grandfather wasn't just a rancher," she said softly. "He sheltered wild mustangs here during the government roundups. Hid them in these tunnels to keep them free. This place, it wasn't just land, it was a sanctuary." Eli traced a finger along a faded photograph, his grandfather, younger and strong, standing beside a proud mustang in front of the very same barn. For the first time, he didn't feel the weight of his grandfather's legacy as a chain. He felt it as a torch. Word spread quickly. The tunnels were declared a protected historical site. Eli's property was now off limits to developers. Its value no longer just in dollars, but in the story it carried. Offers came in, bigger than before, but Eli didn't even consider them. Instead, he got to work. Hammer in hand, he patched up the barn, board by board. He replaced the old doors, cleared the underground stable, and restored the lantern fixtures his grandfather once used. Every nail he drove into the wood felt like he's stitching a wound closed. Sometimes, at sunset, he'd hear distant hoofbeats echoing faintly through the tunnels, not frightening anymore, but comforting, like whispers from the past. And the crow, it never strayed far. It became a familiar figure, on the roof at dawn, on the fence post at dusk, almost like it was making sure he stayed the course. One crisp morning, Eli stood by the barn, looking out over the ranch bathed in sunrise. The fields stretched out endlessly, the fences mended, the air clear. The land didn't feel empty anymore, it felt alive. For years he'd been running, chasing rodeos, chasing ghosts, chasing freedom. But here, in the place he'd once tried to demolish, he found something he never expected. Belonging. He glanced up at the crow. It stared back, unblinking. For the first time, Eli smiled, not the tired smirk of a drifter, but the real smile of a man who'd finally come home. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of hay and open country. And in that quiet moment, it felt like the land itself exhaled. The barn, the tunnels, the crow, the mustangs. They'd all been waiting for him to return. The crow's distant caw echoed across the valley one last time, fading into the golden horizon. Eli's story had come to rest, but out here in the Wild West, the land is full of whispers, waiting for someone to listen. Some secrets aren't meant to be buried. If you enjoyed this tale, saddle up for the next one, where animals, land, and bloodlines collide once again. Because in this country, every fence post, every hoofbeat, and every cry in the night carries a story worth telling.